There was a couple who used to go to England on vacations. England is this little country just off the coast of Northern Ireland, okay? Sorry to my English friends, I know we've got some. They love the scenery there, and they love to shop in the quaint little stores. They both especially liked antique stores and pottery stores. Their favorite thing was teacups. And they just so happened to be in one of their favorite pottery stores on the occasion of their 25th wedding anniversary. A celebratory purchase was in order. On that day in this beautiful shop, they saw a beautiful cup, and they said, "May we see that? We've never seen one quite so beautiful." As the lady handed it to them, suddenly the cup spoke. "You don't understand," it said. "I haven't always been a teacup. There was a time when I was red and I was clay. My master took me and rolled me and patted me over and over, and I yelled out, 'Leave me alone.' But he only smiled and said, 'Not yet.' Then I was placed on a spinning wheel," the cup said, "and suddenly I was spun around and around and around. 'Stop it! Stop it!' I screamed. But the master only nodded and said, 'Not yet.' Then he put me in the oven. I have never felt such heat," the teacup said. "I wondered why he wanted to burn me, and I yelled, 'Let me out! Let me out!' I could see him through the opening, and I could read his lips as he shook his head and said, 'Not yet.' Finally, the door opened. He took me out and he put me on the shelf, and I began to cool. Whew, that was better. And he brushed then and painted me all over. The fumes of the paint were horrible. I thought I would gag. I said, 'Stop it, stop it.' He only nodded and said, 'Not yet.' Then suddenly he put me back in the oven. Not like the first one, this one was twice as hot, and I knew that I would suffocate. I begged, I pleaded, I screamed, 'Let me out, let me out.' All the while I could see him through the opening, nodding his head and saying, 'Not yet.' Then I knew there wasn't any hope. I knew I would never make it. I was ready to give up, but the door opened. He took me out and he placed me on the shelf. About an hour later, he handed me a mirror. 'Look at yourself,' he said. And I did. And I said, 'That's not me. That couldn't be me. That's beautiful. I'm beautiful.' Then the master said, 'I want you to remember, I know that it hurts to be rolled and patted, but if I had left you alone, you would have dried up. I know it made you dizzy to spin on that wheel, but if I had stopped, you would have crumbled. I knew it hurt and was hot and disagreeable in the oven, but if I hadn't put you there, you would have cracked. I know the fumes were bad when I brushed and painted you all over, but if I hadn't done that, you would never have hardened, and you would never have had any color in your life. And if I hadn't have put you back in that second oven, you wouldn't survive for very long because the hardness would not have held. Now you are a finished product. You are what I had in mind when I first began with you.' This is a story of the ongoing work of transformation that it takes to make something beautiful. In our own lives and in our own faith, we call this work the work of sanctifying grace. It's the idea that God is at work in our lives, perfecting God's love within us. But this is not only a word for individual human lives. This is also a word for the local church, the gathered community of God that lives and grows and gets shaped and reshaped throughout its lifetime. Think about this place where we are meeting right here today. You know, in 1821, the South Carolina Conference of the Methodist Church appointed a circuit rider by the name of Elijah Sinclair. He was appointed to preach the gospel here in Florida, and he made his way right here to Amelia Island. The South Carolina Conference had a vision for something new. It planted a preacher, a leader here, and the beginnings of Memorial United Methodist Church and of Trinity United Methodist Church occurred in 1822. We're nearly 200, bear that in mind. This tiny fellowship met in some people's homes. It met in the Pioneer Hotel. It met even in the Timonus building on the corner of 2nd and Center Streets. And maybe, but we are not certain, in a church building that was in Old Town. They met together like that for 30 years before someone had a vision for a church building and made it happen. In 1857, 1858, according to what can be found and has been recorded, there was a building in place in which the Methodists invited the newly established Presbyterian Church to come and have communion with them. That year was also the year that it was recorded that this little Methodist church that had had 40 people in it grew to have 100 people in it. And this was the first physical structure of this church. And it stood from that time until 1926 on the corner of 6th and Broome Streets. Times were not always easy. On the 25th of July, 1894, one of my predecessors, a man by the name of Pastor Moore, made a discouraging report about the spiritual life of the church. He said these words: "We are not very sanguine as to any improvements in the spiritual condition of the church. Indeed, we are brought to face evidences of retrogression on the part of some who, though always weak, were looked upon as earnestly desiring to be saved from their sins. With the rising political thermometer, they were seen making more frequent visits to the saloon than they were to the sanctuary of God. May the time come soon when the church at least can cast a sober vote ballot." I wonder what made me think of that. The 1920s brought better reports of revival in this church. And as the Spirit moved, the vision was caught of a new church building for Memorial. E.W. Bailey and John Simmons had been thinking of this far in advance, and they had purchased the very land that we meet on today in 1906. In 1923, they donated the land to the church, and they injected some impetus into the planning process for a new church building, with work being completed on our sanctuary building in early 1930. Then in 1990, this church needed to grow again. And it undertook the building of where? Maxwell Hall, which was completed on St. Patrick's Day in 1991, and today is probably housing around 250 of you, sometimes over 300 of you, for worship here on Sunday mornings. Why do I tell you all of this history? I tell you this to illustrate to you, if you are not already aware, that this church is a church that has a history of living into ambitious and faith-fueled vision for the building of the kingdom of God. Whether it was the vision of the South Carolina Conference in the early 1800s that made them send a preacher, or whether it was the vision of a group of people who knew that a move to Center Street was the right move early in the 20th century, or whether it was a church who knew that they needed to build another fellowship space that would become its largest worship space, this is a church that has been unafraid to take on the vision that God gives it and to run with it. This is a church that has heard the call to plan, to grow, to go again and again. It is in our DNA. We started this series in the book of Nehemiah. We learned about the importance of inspecting the walls, of knowing where you are at, how the land lies. We've also heard through the prophet Habakkuk and through the Psalms about the importance of establishing a sense of mission. There's that mission statement. A sense of vision. and a set of values to live and to work by. We've spent time exploring them. We have done the groundwork, and today we follow Nehemiah's story again to find out what happened after he had received the vision and inspected the walls. I mean, of course, what else was there for Nehemiah to do except to set about the work that was before him? After the inspection of the walls, Nehemiah begins to organize the folks that he has with him, and they set about the work that God has called them to. The high priest Eliashib sets to work with his fellow priests, and they build the sheep gate. The men of Jericho work alongside them. The sons of Hassenaah built up the fish gate. Meremoth and his people worked next to them, making repairs. Next to them was another family, and then another family, and another family. All of them doing their work, getting their jobs done as they had been invited to do. All of them knowing what needed to be done because the walls had been inspected, the plans had been set in place. These were people who knew what their task was and who were organized and who set about fulfilling it. And dear friends, we have got to be people of that spirit too. Knowing the vision, understanding the plans, and being willing to move forward. As we reflect back on the biblical story of the rebuilding of the Jerusalem's walls, as we reflect back on the story so far of this local church and its mission and ministry over almost 200 years, we must not only know the backstory, but we must also know the future, the vision. We must know the next chapter that we are about to write in the story here, and we've got to have a plan in place for that. I made a pastoral visit to one of our church members one day, and we were talking about the history of this place and the life of this church over many decades. And I was talking to him about how we were moving through this process of writing a vision and a mission and of getting some direction for our next years together. And he said these words to me. He said, "Charlie, if you don't have an idea of where you need to go next, if you don't have an idea of what the next summit you have to climb is, then you have already begun your decline." Hear that again. If you do not have an idea of where you need to go next, if you do not have an idea of the next summit you have to climb, then you have already begun your decline. My friends, we have got to be a people who continue to plant and grow and go, as has been our DNA for the guts of 2 centuries. We have got to be the people who know our vision, our mission, and who are willing to get on with the task. We have got to be the people who know what our next goal and target for growing is, because if we don't, then the news is that we've already begun our decline. So today, I want to share with you some areas of work that this plan is going to take us into in the years ahead. There are 3 main areas that our strategic planning team defined as what would be the areas of our work. You've heard some of this language already in the last few weeks as I've come through it. And so the first area of our work is the most important area of the work that we do. And it's the area of developing deeply rooted disciples. You've heard me use that phrase again and again. Our desire is to be a church that is constantly developing deeply rooted disciples. And in order to do that, we must create and we must implement a discipleship plan. That is already in the works. Pastor Carey's going to be talking to you about that in just a couple of weeks' time. But a discipleship plan is a plan that helps us take a person who comes to us not knowing God at all, but desiring to find out about who God is. We can introduce them to Jesus in services of worship or in classroom opportunities, but that's not the end of their story. It wasn't the end of your story when you started out in faith. A discipleship plan is a plan that takes us from that beginning point right through on a journey towards Christian maturity. As part of developing deeply rooted disciples, we want to, in the next 3 years, take an intentional focus on evangelism and on faith sharing. We said it already a couple of weeks ago. It's important that in the life of this church, we are seeing new life birthed, that we are seeing people coming to meet with Jesus for the very first time so that we can join them on that journey towards Christian maturity. We want to have a focus on evangelism and faith sharing. We want to build alongside our already successful models of Christian formation. We want to build in some other alternatives. We have an amazing Sunday school class program, and we want to put alongside that another range of classes, some of them short-term, some of them longer-term in nature. We want to include some what would have been called class meetings or fellowship or Wesley groups in the life of our church. These are all little alternatives to the way that we already do formation, all building into this discipleship plan. For that to happen, we've got to develop and train new leaders and leaders of small group ministries. And all of this will be working towards that vision of developing deeply rooted disciples at Memorial United Methodist Church. The last way that we will do that is that we will explore ways to partner in mission and ministry with our brothers and sisters at Trinity United Methodist Church, to grow closer in fellowship to them, and to be a better Wesleyan witness together here in Fernandina Beach. Our first area of work is that of developing deeply rooted disciples. The next area of our work is to expand our reach, expanding the reach of our ministries. The first way that we are going to do that is that next year we are going to do our very best to start a fourth service at Memorial. We talked about it in the year gone by. It did not happen, but it's time for it to happen. More often than not, this place is full. Our 11 o'clock service is full, and it only takes very special people to make it to 8 o'clock worship. So there are some seats there, of course. There are some seats there, but we need to offer an alternative time for those who cannot make worship on a Sunday for reasons of work or care or something else going on in their lives. We'll be working on that, and by the end of 2022, we would love to see that service established, and we would love to have it with an average weekly worship attendance of 100 people over 3 years. That is our goal. That is our aim. It's ambitious. Start praying into that, dear friends. Expanding our reach also means the development of a Fresh Expressions team. You have heard again and again about this ministry of Fresh Expressions that is throughout our conference here in Florida. We are wanting to move into that area now. We've already had a team of people who have shown an interest come together and begin to have some conversations about what it might look like. The whole thing about Fresh Expressions of worship is that it is new forms of worship for new people. And that's what we want to do. The other thing about Fresh Expressions is that it is experimental. That means you try something. It might fall flat on its face and fail, but that's okay. At least you tried. Our goal is to develop a culture of experimentation with Fresh Expressions in this church. And I would like to see us experimenting with 3 Fresh Expressions each year, 2020 to 2022. 2 or 3 of them may fall flat on their face each year. It's okay as long as we get into the habit of experimenting. Third, in terms of expanding our reach, we want to begin and organize a network of small groups over the bridge to accommodate the almost 30% of our people that make their way here for worship or for discipleship ministries week by week. People who live their lives on the other side of the bridge. We want to say as a church that we want to gather where you are, and we want to give you opportunities to serve where you are. So that means building on existing missions partnerships there, such as Gracie's Kitchen. It means building on the developing school partnership with Yulee Primary School. It means looking for other opportunities to serve there. That doesn't mean we forget what's going on here, of course. This is home base. But it does mean that we're looking at new ways for our people to connect closer to home and to serve God right where they live. Our goals and our aims are for deeply rooted disciples and for expanding the ministries of our church. The third area of our work is this. It's to missionally improve our facilities. First and foremost, that means doing the work of renovating and updating Maxwell Hall for 21st century ministry. Are you into that? That takes a project, it takes some work, of course it does, but it's time to do it. One of my first reflections when I moved here in July 2018 and came to this building for the first time was this: oh dear Lord, it's like walking into the 1990s. Now, it's great. We have a lot of fun in here, but we've got work to do to bring this place up to scratch and up to speed, to use it as best as we possibly can to ensure that our worship space is maximized, that we try and gain a little extra storage and a little extra classroom meeting space. Those plans are coming together. Some conversations are happening around that already, but that is a project that has to be done. While the rest of the other sanctuary got all of its work done, this place did not get work done, and it's time to set about doing that. I hope that you will come on board with that. Then we also want to establish a dedicated youth space and play area to ensure that our growing youth ministry has a place to call home. Charles Sandusky is welcoming upwards of 25 and 30 young people into our multi-purpose room every week at the minute. It is growing and it is growing, and we want to support that. But we don't only want to do that in response to larger youth groups. We want to do that because in this church, we want to say that we value the importance of legacy and the importance of our future, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and say, these kids need space and we want to give it to them. And so, dear friends, I hope that you'll get behind the idea of not only doing the work in this place, but of also establishing a dedicated youth space at Memorial United Methodist Church. Second, and also alongside that, we want to update and renovate our church playground for use by both our children's ministry and our Lamb Early Education Centre. It's also a project that is overdue. Our final area of missionally improving our facilities here on Centre Street is to do whatever we can about the infamous parking issues of a downtown campus. I cannot make you any promises, I cannot share any plans with you at the minute, but I can say that we are having as many conversations as possible to try and get some sort of answer to improve the parking around this place. Dear friends, these are the three main areas of our work. I am sharing with you in general today. There are obviously many more details, but these are some of the ballparks that we want to be hitting to in the coming years. There's one other thing I do want to share with you though, and that's our BHAG. Who knows what a BHAG is? Put up your hand if you know what a BHAG is, all right? This is language used by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, and a BHAG for him is a big, hairy, audacious goal, okay? This is the big, hairy, audacious goal. I want us to live into these three areas of work, and I also want us to work towards eliminating all our outstanding debt by the end of the year that we turn 200. That's 2022. So that we can begin our third century of mission and ministry and witness on this island, in this community, and in the world as a debt-free, growing, vibrant church, leading the way for the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church. That's what I think we can do. It is a BHAG because it is big, it is hairy, and it is audacious. But you know what? If you don't set a goal, you're not going to meet a goal. And church, I know that we can meet those goals because it's in our DNA. We've seen it already over 200 years. It's what we are about. Put your hand up if you've ever watched the best television show in the world, The West Wing. Okay? If you haven't, you need to make that right in your life. This is my favorite show of all time. And in The West Wing, as they move through all of these sort of situations, it's a White House political drama, okay? As they move through all of these situations in the world and in their nation, they move very quickly from one storyline to the next. And as they transition at the end of one issue and move into the next one, they always ask the same question. What's next? What's next? Dear friends, I'm outlining for you today what's next. It is big and hairy and audacious. And you know what? It should be. Because if our goals in life are not going to make us stretch for them and work for them, well then they aren't the right goals for us to be aiming for. I pray and I hope that you will come on board with this. I pray and I hope that you will get into this work. You know, Nehemiah, when he wrote up his vision for the rebuilding of those walls, he was mocked and he was ridiculed. He said to them all, hey, let's go and do this. Let's set about our work. Let's get this job done. He told them that by the hand of God, that the hand of God had been gracious upon him, and also that the words that the king had spoken to him assured him that this vision was one worth moving into. Then the people said to him, well, let's start building. And then they committed themselves to the common good. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about Nehemiah's vision, they mocked and they ridiculed us, saying, what is that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then Nehemiah replied with these words, the God of heaven is the one who will give us success, and we, his servants, are going to start building. Dear friends, I invite you today to think about these areas of work, to think about the mission and the vision and the values that we've been talking about in recent weeks, to pray into it, and to put up your hand and say, I'm in. To help you with that, we are going to give to everyone leaving the church today a little brochure. This outlines some of the process that our strategic planning team moved through. There's some words to guide us through those 3 areas of work. We have our mission, vision, and values here on this big piece of center paper. And then we have these goals and targets that I've been talking about this morning in this centerpiece here, split into the 4 areas or 4 columns of our work: worship, study, community, and mission, and then also an administrative column. Friends, take this home, pray about it. If you've got questions, come along today to our town hall, or come back on Wednesday night or Thursday morning or next Sunday and bring them to our town hall. There's no sense of moving forward with things unless our questions get asked and we have the opportunity to answer them together. My hope and my prayer is that we all, each of us, jump on board with this. I believe that God is inviting us to step into our future together, to step into this vision that we have been given.